The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of eastern Texas like a shroud, carrying with it the acrid smell of death that had become all too familiar to Samuel Hayes. It was October 1887, and the cotton fields that stretched endlessly across Cherokee County bore witness to a land in transition, where the old ways of farming were giving way to ambitious cattle ranching, and where fortunes could be made or lost with a single season's harvest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel stood on the weathered porch of his ranch house, his calloused hands gripping a tin cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. At 38 years old, he possessed the weathered appearance of a man who had seen too much hardship. In too few years, his dark hair, prematurely streaked with gray, framed a face that bore the deep lines of constant worry and sleepless nights. The green eyes that had once sparkled with ambition now held the hollow look of a man watching everything he had built slowly crumble away. The Hayes Ranch had once been the pride of Cherokee County, a sprawling operation that covered nearly 3,000 acres of prime grazing land. Samuel's late wife, Margaret, had often remarked that the property looked like something from a painting: endless pastures dotted with oak trees, rolling hills that caught the morning sun, and clear streams that provided perfect water sources for the hundreds of cattle that had once grazed peacefully across the landscape. But that was before the sickness came. It had started 3 months ago, with just a few head showing symptoms: lethargy, loss of appetite, and a strange discoloration around their eyes and muzzles. Samuel had initially dismissed it as the usual seasonal ailments that affected cattle during the transition from summer to fall. He had dealt with sick animals before, and his practical approach to ranching had always served him well in managing the various challenges that came with raising livestock in the unpredictable Texas climate. However, this illness proved to be unlike anything he had encountered in his 15 years of ranching. The affected cattle would stand motionless in the fields for hours, their heads hanging low as if the simple act of holding them upright required more energy than they possessed. Their once glossy coats became dull and patchy, and many developed open sores that refused to heal despite Samuel's best efforts with conventional treatments. Within weeks, the mysterious ailment had spread throughout his entire herd with devastating efficiency. The cattle that didn't die outright became so weak and emaciated that they were essentially worthless for either beef production or breeding purposes. Samuel watched helplessly as animals that had represented years of careful breeding and substantial financial investment transformed into walking skeletons that served as constant reminders of his mounting desperation. The local veterinarian, Dr. William Crawford, had made several expensive visits to the ranch, each time offering different theories about the cause of the illness and prescribing various treatments that proved utterly ineffective. Crawford was a well-educated man who had studied animal medicine at the University in Austin, but his modern scientific approach seemed powerless against whatever was killing Samuel's cattle. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Crawford had admitted during his most recent visit, his professional confidence visibly shaken by the scope of the devastation. "The symptoms don't match any known cattle diseases, and none of the standard treatments are having any effect. You might want to consider slaughtering the remaining healthy animals before they become infected as well." The suggestion to destroy his remaining livestock had filled Samuel with a mixture of rage and despair that he struggled to control. These cattle represented far more than just financial assets. They were the foundation of the life he had built with Margaret, the legacy they had planned to leave for the children they had never been blessed to have. Destroying them would mean admitting defeat in a way that went far deeper than simple business failure. The ranch house itself reflected the gradual decline that had characterized the past year of Samuel's life. Margaret Hayes had died the previous winter from pneumonia, leaving behind a home that had once buzzed with feminine energy and warm hospitality. Her absence was evident in every room, from the kitchen, where her collection of ceramic dishes gathered dust, to the parlor where her needlework remained unfinished on the table where she had left it during her final illness. Margaret's death had shattered Samuel's world in ways that extended far beyond the obvious emotional devastation. She had been his partner in every aspect of the ranching operation, from managing the household finances to helping with the spring roundups when extra hands were needed. Her practical wisdom and unwavering optimism had sustained him through previous difficult periods, and her loss had left him struggling to maintain the motivation necessary for the demanding work of running a large cattle operation. The isolation that followed Margaret's death had been made worse by the social dynamics of Cherokee County, where most social activities revolved around church gatherings and family events that emphasized everything Samuel had lost. Well-meaning neighbors had initially offered support and sympathy, but their efforts to include him in community activities only served to highlight his loneliness and his status as an outsider in a society organized around married couples and established families. Mrs. Dorothy Watson, the widow who managed the general store in nearby Jacksonville, had made several attempts to draw Samuel into the social circles that might lead to romantic attachments with other eligible women in the area. Her matchmaking efforts, while kindly intended, felt premature and inappropriate to a man still grieving the loss of the only woman he had ever loved. "Samuel, you're still a young man with good prospects," Mrs. Watson would say during his weekly trips to town for supplies. "Margaret wouldn't have wanted you to spend the rest of your life alone on that ranch. There are several fine Christian women who would be honored to help you rebuild your life." The suggestions invariably made Samuel uncomfortable, not because he was opposed to the idea of eventual remarriage, but because he felt unable to imagine forming the kind of partnership he had shared with Margaret with someone who hadn't been part of building the life they had created together. The thought of courting strange women while his cattle were dying and his ranch was failing seemed both impractical and emotionally impossible. The financial pressures created by the cattle disease had transformed his comfortable existence into a daily struggle for survival. The Hayes Ranch had been profitable enough to provide Samuel and Margaret with a modest but secure lifestyle, complete with hired hands to help with the demanding seasonal work, and enough surplus income to make gradual improvements to both the property and the livestock breeding program. Now, with his cattle either dead or dying, Samuel found himself unable to meet the mortgage payments that had once been easily manageable. The Cherokee County Bank, where he had maintained good relationships for years, was beginning to pressure him for overdue payments on loans that had been secured against the value of his livestock. The banker, Thomas Mitchell, had been sympathetic initially, but business considerations were beginning to outweigh personal friendship as the ranch's financial situation deteriorated. "Samuel, I understand the difficult circumstances you're facing," Mitchell had explained during their most recent meeting, his tone reflecting the uncomfortable balance between personal sympathy and professional responsibility. "However, the bank has its own obligations to depositors and shareholders. We need to see some progress toward resolving your account delinquencies, or we may be forced to consider foreclosure proceedings." The threat of losing the ranch represented more than just financial ruin. It would mean the destruction of everything he and Margaret had worked to build together. The property contained not only their shared memories, but also Margaret's final resting place in the small cemetery plot they had established beneath the ancient oak tree where they had been married 15 years earlier. Samuel's hired hands had gradually departed as he became unable to pay their wages regularly, leaving him to manage the remaining cattle and property maintenance largely by himself. The physical demands of running even a reduced operation were exhausting for a single man, particularly one struggling with the emotional weight of grief and financial stress that affected his sleep and appetite. Jake Morrison, his most reliable ranch hand, had been the last to leave. staying several weeks longer than his wages justified out of personal loyalty to Samuel and fond memories of Margaret's kindness to his own family. Jake's departure had been particularly difficult because it marked the end of Samuel's last meaningful daily human contact. "Mr. Hayes, I'm real sorry about having to leave," Jake had said during their final conversation, his weathered face showing genuine regret about abandoning his employer during such difficult circumstances. "My wife's expecting again, and I've got to find steady work somewhere that can pay regular wages. If things turn around here, you know I'd come back in a heartbeat." The understanding that Jake's departure was motivated by practical necessity rather than personal disloyalty did little to ease the sting of being abandoned during his greatest time of need. Samuel found himself alone on a property that had once bustled with activity, surrounded by the constant reminders of death and failure that his sick cattle represented. The autumn weather had been particularly harsh, with early frosts that killed the grass prematurely and left Samuel scrambling to provide adequate feed for his remaining livestock. The seasonal changes that had once brought him satisfaction as a natural part of the ranching cycle now felt like additional pressure in his struggle to keep his operation functioning despite overwhelming obstacles. Local merchants, who had once extended generous credit terms based on his reputation for prompt payment, were beginning to demand cash for essential supplies like feed, medicine, and basic household necessities. The gradual erosion of his commercial relationships reflected the community's growing awareness that the Hayes Ranch was failing, transforming Samuel from a respected member of the local business community into someone whose financial stability was questionable. The Cherokee County newspaper had recently published an article about the mysterious cattle disease that was affecting several ranches in the area, though Samuel's operation had been hit hardest by the epidemic. The article quoted local officials who admitted they had no explanation for the illness or effective treatments to recommend, leaving affected ranchers to deal with the crisis largely on their own. Dr. Crawford's repeated failures to identify or treat the disease had led Samuel to seek advice from other ranchers who might have encountered similar problems, but his inquiries had yielded no useful information. The cattle disease appeared to be unprecedented in the local area, leaving Samuel without the benefit of experienced guidance from neighbors who had faced similar challenges. As he stood on his porch that October morning, watching the mist slowly lift from pastures where skeletal cattle stood motionless among the dying grass, Samuel felt the weight of desperation settling over him like a physical burden. The proud ranch that had once represented his success as a businessman and his happiness as a husband had become a monument to failure and loss that seemed to mock every effort he made to salvage something from the wreckage of his former life. Sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the morning silence, drawing Samuel's attention toward the dirt road that connected his property to the main route leading to Jacksonville. A single rider was approaching the ranch house, moving at the steady pace of someone on routine business rather than the urgent gallop that might indicate an emergency or important news. As the rider drew closer, Samuel recognized Marcus Webb, a traveling trader who made irregular circuits through Cherokee County, buying and selling various goods that might be of interest to isolated ranch families. Webb was a thin, nervous man in his 50s whose shabby clothes and shifty manner had always made Samuel slightly uncomfortable. Though he had occasionally purchased useful items from the trader's eclectic inventory, Webb dismounted near the porch with the careful movements of a man whose joints had been stiffened by long hours in the saddle. His pale blue eyes surveyed the visible signs of the ranch's decline with the calculating assessment of someone who specialized in identifying opportunities that might benefit from other people's misfortunes. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," Webb said with the forced cheerfulness that characterized his business dealings. "Heard you've been having some trouble with your cattle. Thought you might be interested in something that could help with your situation." The suggestion that Webb might have solutions to problems that had baffled educated veterinarians struck Samuel as highly unlikely. But his desperation was reaching levels that made him willing to consider even improbable possibilities. The traders. Timing was suspiciously convenient, suggesting that he had heard about Samuel's troubles through the local gossip network that kept traveling merchants informed about potential business opportunities. "What kind of help are you talking about?" Samuel asked cautiously, recognizing that any offer from Marcus Webb would likely involve some kind of transaction that served the trader's interests more than Samuel's actual needs. Webb's smile revealed teeth that had been stained by years of tobacco use, and his fidgeting hand suggested the nervous energy of someone preparing to make a sales pitch that might not be entirely honest. "Well, Mr. Hayes, I've got something that might interest you. Something that could solve your cattle problem and maybe help with your other difficulties as well." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus Webb's weathered hands fumbled with the leather satchel strapped to his saddle, his movements deliberate, but tinged with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was about to propose something that might not be entirely respectable. The morning sun had burned away most of the mist, revealing the full extent of the devastation that had befallen the Hayes Ranch skeletal cattle scattered across brown pastures, broken fencing that Samuel could no longer afford to repair, and outbuildings that showed clear signs of neglect. "Mr. Hayes," Webb began, his voice carrying the rehearsed quality of a man who had practiced this particular sales pitch, "I know you're a decent Christian man who's fallen on hard times through no fault of your own. What I'm about to propose might sound unusual, but I believe it could solve several of your problems at once." Samuel studied the trader's face, noting the way Webb's eyes avoided direct contact while he spoke. Years of dealing with livestock sales had taught Samuel to recognize when someone was preparing to make an offer that was either too good to be true or involved complications that weren't being disclosed up front. However, his desperate circumstances left him with little choice but to listen to whatever scheme Webb was preparing to present. "I'm listening," Samuel replied cautiously, though he made no move to invite the trader inside where they might continue their conversation in more comfortable surroundings. Something about Webb's manner suggested that this transaction was better conducted outdoors, away from the domestic spaces that still held memories of his life with Margaret. Webb glanced around nervously, as if checking to ensure they weren't being observed by neighbors or other potential witnesses to their conversation. "Well, the thing is, I've been traveling through the Indian Territory lately, and I came across a situation that might benefit both of us. There's a Cherokee family that's been hit hard by the same kind of troubles that are affecting folks around here: crop failures, sickness, that sort of thing." The mention of Cherokee people immediately caught Samuel's attention, not because he harbored any particular prejudices against Native Americans, but because interactions between white settlers and tribal communities in Cherokee County were often complicated by historical tensions and cultural misunderstandings that could create unexpected problems for everyone involved. "What kind of situation are you talking about exactly?" Samuel asked, his tone reflecting growing wariness about whatever arrangement Webb was preparing to propose. "Well," Webb continued, his voice dropping to a more confidential level, "they've got a young woman, maybe 22, 23 years old, who's been sickly for months. The family can't afford to keep caring for her, and she's not strong enough to contribute much to their household. They're looking for someone who might take her in, provide her with food and shelter, in exchange for whatever light work she might be capable of doing." The suggestion that Samuel might take responsibility for a sick Cherokee woman struck him as both impractical and potentially problematic. His ranch was barely functioning with just himself to manage the essential tasks, and adding another person to his household, particularly someone who required care rather than providing assistance, seemed like an additional burden he couldn't afford to assume. "I don't see how taking in a sick woman would help with my cattle problem," Samuel replied, though he found himself curious about the specifics of whatever arrangement Webb was proposing. Webb's knowing smile suggested that he had anticipated exactly this objection. "That's where it gets interesting, Mr. Hayes. This particular young woman has some unusual knowledge about healing traditional Cherokee remedies that her grandmother taught her. The family mentioned that she's had success treating sick animals in the past, though her own health problems have prevented her from practicing much lately. The claim that a Cherokee woman might possess veterinary knowledge that could succeed where Dr. Crawford's university education had failed struck Samuel as highly improbable. However, his desperation was reaching levels that made even unlikely solutions worth considering, particularly when conventional approaches had proven completely ineffective. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel asked, though he suspected. He already knew the general nature of whatever transaction Webb was preparing to suggest. $5, Webb said simply. "That's all they're asking. $5 to cover her transportation here and some medical supplies she need. In return, you get someone who might be able to help with your cattle problem, and she gets a chance to recover her health in a stable household situation." Webb's fidgeting increased noticeably as he prepared to address what were obviously the less attractive aspects of his proposal. "Well, the truth is, she's been pretty sick herself, some kind of lung condition that's left her weak and prone to coughing fits. The Cherokee family is worried that she might not survive the winter if she doesn't get better care and nutrition than they can provide." The revelation that the Cherokee woman was potentially dying added a moral dimension to the transaction that made Samuel deeply uncomfortable. The idea of purchasing someone who might be seeking refuge from death felt disturbingly similar to the kinds of human trafficking that he had heard occurred in less civilized parts of the frontier. "Are you sure this is a legitimate arrangement?" Samuel asked. "It sounds like you might be taking advantage of desperate people who have no other options." Webb's defensive response suggested that Samuel's concerns about the ethics of the situation were not entirely misplaced. "Mr. Hayes, I'm trying to help everyone involved here. The Cherokee family gets money they desperately need, the young woman gets a chance to recover in better circumstances, and you get someone who might be able to solve your cattle problem. Nobody's being forced into anything they don't want to do." The justification sounded rehearsed, as if Webb had anticipated questions about the morality of his business dealings and had prepared responses designed to minimize concerns about exploitation. However, Samuel's own desperate circumstances made it difficult for him to take the moral high ground when he was considering participating in whatever questionable arrangement Webb was promoting. "What's your name?" Samuel asked, realizing that their entire conversation had treated the Cherokee woman as a commodity rather than as a person with individual identity and personal history. "They call her Little Dove," Webb replied, though his tone suggested that he wasn't entirely certain about the accuracy of the name he was providing. "Like I said, she's been educated some by missionaries, so she speaks English well enough to communicate. She understands what kind of arrangement is being proposed." The mention of missionary education provided some reassurance that the Cherokee woman would be able to communicate effectively and might possess some familiarity with white cultural expectations. However, Samuel found himself wondering what circumstances had led an educated young woman to a situation where she was being offered to strangers for $5. "Where exactly would I meet her?" Samuel asked, recognizing that his questions were beginning to sound like acceptance of Webb's proposal rather than simple curiosity about its details. "There's a trading post about 15 miles north of here, right at the edge of the Indian Territory boundary." Webb explained with obvious relief that Samuel was showing interest in proceeding with the transaction. "The Cherokee family will bring her there tomorrow morning if you're interested. You can meet her, see if you think she might be helpful with your situation, and decide whether you want to go through with the arrangement." The suggestion that Samuel could evaluate the Cherokee woman before committing to the transaction provided some protection against obvious deception, though he recognized that a single meeting would be insufficient for assessing whether she possessed any genuine knowledge about treating sick cattle. What if she can't help with the cattle disease? Samuel asked. What happens then? Webb's shrug suggested that he viewed the arrangement as involving acceptable risks for everyone involved. Then you've got household help for $5, assuming she recovers her health enough to be useful around the ranch. Even if she can't cure your cattle, she might be able to help with cooking, cleaning, and other domestic tasks that would free up your time for ranch work. The practical argument made sense from a purely economic perspective, though Samuel remained troubled by the human implications of purchasing someone whose primary value might be as unpaid domestic labor. His discomfort was balanced by recognition that his current living situation was genuinely unsustainable without some kind of assistance. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of cattle lowing in distress from the nearest pasture, where several animals were exhibiting the advanced symptoms of the mysterious disease. Samuel watched helplessly as a bull that had once been the pride of his breeding program stumbled and fell, too weak to maintain its footing despite efforts to regain its balance. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Webb said, gesturing toward the suffering animal. Your cattle are dying, and nobody else has been able to help. What do you have to lose by trying something different? The sight of his livestock and such obvious distress reinforced Samuel's growing desperation and his willingness to consider even improbable solutions to his crisis. The Cherokee woman's traditional healing knowledge might indeed prove ineffective, but the alternative was watching his remaining cattle die while he did nothing to save them. All right, Samuel said finally, his voice reflecting resignation more than enthusiasm. I'll meet with her tomorrow morning. But I want it understood that if she's obviously too sick to be helpful, or if I think this arrangement isn't legitimate, I'm not going through with it. Webb's relieved smile suggested that he had not been entirely confident about Samuel's willingness to participate in his scheme. Fair enough, Mr. Hayes. Meet us at Bradshaw's trading post around 9 in the morning. You can talk with Little Dove herself and make your own judgment about whether this arrangement makes sense for both of you. As Webb prepared to depart, Samuel found himself wondering what desperation had driven him to consider purchasing a human being, even under circumstances that were being presented as mutually beneficial. His grief over Margaret's death and his anxiety about losing the ranch had apparently affected his judgment in ways that he was only beginning to recognize. One more thing, Mr. Hayes, Webb said as he mounted his horse. The Cherokee family wants this kept quiet. There are some folks in these parts who might not understand the situation, and they don't want trouble with local authorities or neighbors who might have opinions about this kind of arrangement. The request for secrecy confirmed Samuel's suspicions that the transaction involved questionable elements that might not withstand scrutiny from law enforcement or community leaders. However, his isolation on the ranch meant that maintaining privacy about his domestic arrangements would be relatively simple, assuming the Cherokee woman proved to be genuinely helpful rather than an additional source of problems. That evening, Samuel sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the $5 bill that represented his commitment to Webb's proposal. The modest sum felt simultaneously insignificant and enormous too small to represent the purchase of a human being, but too large to risk losing when his financial resources were so severely limited. Margaret's empty chair across from him seemed to reproach him for even considering bringing another woman into their home, regardless of the practical circumstances that had motivated his decision. The domestic space that had once been filled with warmth and companionship now felt like a shrine to his former happiness that might be violated by the presence of a stranger whose cultural background and personal history were completely unknown. To him, the October wind rattled the windows as Samuel tried to imagine what kind of conversation he might have with a sick Cherokee woman whose family was desperate enough to accept $5 for her care. The entire situation struck him as a symptom of the broader social and economic disruptions that were affecting both white and Native American communities throughout Cherokee County. Sleep came reluctantly that night, filled with dreams that mixed memories of Margaret's final illness with anxious speculation about the Cherokee woman he would meet the following morning. Samuel found himself alternately hoping that Little Dove would prove to be the miracle cure for his cattle disease and fearing that she would represent yet another burden in his already overwhelming struggle to salvage something from the wreckage of his former life. The pre-dawn hours brought renewed doubts about the wisdom of his decision, but the sound of dying cattle in his pastures served as a constant reminder that conventional solutions had already failed. Whatever risks were involved in Webb's proposal, the alternative was certain destruction of everything he and Margaret had worked to build together. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the eastern horizon, Samuel prepared for a journey that would either save his ranch or lead him deeper into the kind of desperate circumstances that could destroy whatever remained of his reputation and his principles. The morning air carried an unseasonable chill. As Samuel guided his wagon along the rutted dirt road toward Bradshaw's trading post, the $5 bill folded carefully in his shirt pocket, feeling heavier than the gold coins he had once carried with confidence. The 15-mile journey through the pine forests and rolling hills that marked the boundary between Cherokee County and the Indian Territory provided ample time for second thoughts about the arrangement he was preparing to finalize with Marcus Webb. Bradshaw's trading post occupied a strategic location where the official boundaries between white settlements and tribal lands blurred into a practical zone of commerce that served both communities. The weathered log building had been constructed by Benjamin Bradshaw, a former Texas Ranger who had recognized the commercial opportunities created by the need for a neutral meeting ground where cultural differences could be temporarily set aside in favor of mutually beneficial trade. The trading post's reputation for honest dealing and fair prices had made it a popular destination for ranchers seeking goods that were difficult to obtain through conventional channels, as well as for Native American families who preferred to conduct business away from the more hostile atmosphere of established white towns. Bradshaw himself was known throughout the region as a man who treated all customers with equal respect, regardless of their racial or cultural background. Samuel's wagon wheels crunched across the gravel yard in front of the trading post as he surveyed the scene before him. Webb's horse was already tied to the hitching rail, along with an unfamiliar pink pony whose decorated bridle suggested Cherokee ownership. The sight of the Native American horse confirmed that Little Dove and her family had indeed arrived as scheduled, making the proposed transaction a genuine possibility rather than simply another of Webb's questionable schemes. Benjamin Bradshaw emerged from his store as Samuel brought his wagon to a halt, the older man's weathered face showing the kind of careful neutrality that suggested he understood the sensitive nature of the business being conducted on his property. Bradshaw was a man in his 60s whose years of frontier experience had taught him the wisdom of maintaining diplomatic relationships with all parties while avoiding entanglement in their personal affairs. "Morning, Samuel," Bradshaw said with a nod that conveyed both greeting and subtle warning about the delicate situation developing in his establishment. "Webb's been waiting for you inside. Got some folks with him you might want to meet." The understated introduction reflected Bradshaw's sophisticated understanding of the complex social dynamics that surrounded interactions between white settlers and Native American families in the post-Reconstruction era. His careful phrasing acknowledged the commercial nature of the meeting while avoiding language that might suggest human trafficking or other illegal activities. Samuel secured his wagon and approached the trading post's entrance with growing apprehension about what he might find inside. The building's interior was dimly lit by oil lamps and filled with the mixed aromas of leather goods, tobacco, and medicinal herbs that characterized frontier commercial establishments serving diverse clientele. Marcus Webb stood near the counter, in conversation with two Cherokee individuals, an elderly man whose dignified bearing suggested tribal leadership, and a young woman whose appearance immediately challenged every assumption Samuel had made about what he might encounter during this meeting. Little Dove was not the sickly, desperate creature that Webb's description had led Samuel to expect. Despite obvious signs of recent illness, a persistent cough and the pallor that suggested prolonged weakness, she possessed a quiet dignity and intelligent awareness that commanded immediate respect. Her dark hair was neatly braided with small beads that caught the lamplight, and her traditional dress, while showing signs of wear, was clean and carefully maintained. More striking than her physical appearance was the direct, evaluating gaze with which she studied Samuel as he entered the trading post. This was clearly not a woman who viewed herself as merchandise being sold to the highest bidder, but rather someone who was assessing a potential arrangement that might serve her own interests as well as those of others involved in the transaction. Elderly Cherokee man stepped forward with the formal courtesy that characterized traditional tribal interactions with outsiders. "I am Joseph Standing Bear," he said in carefully pronounced English. "This is my granddaughter, Mary Little Dove. Marcus Webb has told us of your difficulties with sick cattle." The use of both Cherokee and English names reflected the complex cultural navigation required of Native Americans who maintain traditional identities while participating in the broader American economic system. Standing Bear's dignified presentation suggested that this transaction involved family decisions made with careful consideration rather than desperate circumstances that left no alternatives. "Mr. Standing Bear," Samuel replied, removing his hat, in a gesture of respect that seemed appropriate to the formal nature of their introduction. "I'm Samuel Hayes. I understand that your granddaughter might have knowledge that could help with the disease that's affecting my livestock." Little Dove spoke for herself before her grandfather could respond, her English revealing the missionary education that Webb had mentioned, while her tone conveyed confidence that challenged assumptions about her dependent status. "My grandmother taught me the old ways of healing animals before she passed to the spirit world. I have seen sickness like what Webb describes, and I know plants that can restore health when used properly." The direct assertion of her healing abilities was delivered with quiet conviction rather than desperate sales pitch, suggesting genuine confidence in her traditional knowledge rather than empty promises designed to secure the transaction. Samuel found himself impressed by her self-possessed manner despite the obvious vulnerability of her current circumstances. "What kind of treatments are you talking about?" Samuel asked, recognizing that his evaluation of her potential usefulness would depend on understanding the specific methods she claimed to possess. Little Dove's response demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both Cherokee healing traditions and the skepticism she was likely to encounter from white ranchers accustomed to European medical approaches. The white doctor treats symptoms, but Cherokee healing addresses the spiritual causes of disease. Sick animals often reflect imbalance in the land itself, requiring restoration of harmony between all living things. The explanation sounded mystical and unscientific to Samuel's practical ranching experience, but his desperation made him willing to consider approaches that conventional veterinary medicine had been unable to provide. Dr. Crawford's repeated failures had certainly demonstrated the limitations of university-trained expertise when confronted with unprecedented challenges. Standing Bear added context that helped explain his granddaughter's situation and the family's willingness to consider arrangements with white settlers. "Little Dove's healing knowledge makes her valuable to our people, but her own sickness prevents her from practicing effectively within our community. We believe that living in a different environment might restore her health while allowing her to help others with her gifts." The cultural explanation provided a framework for understanding the transaction that went beyond simple economic desperation, suggesting that Cherokee traditions included concepts of mutual benefit and strategic adaptation that could justify unconventional living arrangements when they served larger purposes. Webb's impatience with the extended conversation was evident in his nervous fidgeting as he attempted to move the meeting toward concrete financial arrangements. "Mr. Hayes, you can see that Little Dove is exactly what I described. An intelligent young woman with healing knowledge who needs a stable situation where she can recover her health while helping with your cattle problem." Samuel found himself studying Little Dove's face as she coughed quietly into a cloth handkerchief, noting the way she controlled her physical discomfort while maintaining her dignified participation in the negotiations. Her illness was clearly genuine, but it had not broken her spirit or reduced her to the desperate helplessness that might have justified Webb's minimal asking price. "What would this arrangement involve exactly?" Samuel asked, addressing Little Dove directly rather than allowing Webb to control the conversation. "What would you expect from me, and what would you be willing to provide in return?" Little Dove's answer revealed careful consideration of the practical and cultural challenges involved in living with a white widower on an isolated ranch. "I would need a separate living space where I could maintain Cherokee customs while learning white ways of keeping house. I would treat your sick animals using traditional methods, and I would help with cooking and cleaning as my health permits." The specific requirements suggested that she had given serious thought to the cultural navigation required for successful integration into a white household while maintaining her own identity and spiritual practices. Her conditions also demonstrated self-respect that challenged any assumptions about her desperate acceptance of whatever terms might be offered. Standing Bear's addition provided family context that helped Samuel understand the broader tribal considerations involved in the arrangement. "Our family believes that Little Dove's healing gifts are meant to serve wherever they are needed most. If your cattle can be saved through Cherokee knowledge, then helping you serves the harmony between our peoples." The philosophical framework suggested that the Cherokee family viewed the arrangement as potentially beneficial for cultural understanding, rather than simply as economic necessity, providing Samuel with a more comfortable context for participating in the transaction. Bradshaw's quiet observation from behind his counter reflected his understanding of the historical significance of the negotiations taking place in his establishment. Folks around here could learn something from Cherokee healing methods. Might be that traditional knowledge has solutions that book learning hasn't figured out yet. The supportive comment from a respected neutral party provided encouragement for Samuel's growing inclination to proceed with the arrangement, particularly when conventional approaches to his cattle disease had proven completely ineffective despite their apparent scientific sophistication. Samuel's final questions addressed the practical concerns that would determine whether the arrangement could function successfully over the long term. "Little Dove, are you certain that you want to take on the responsibility of treating cattle that other methods haven't been able to help? And are you prepared for the isolation of ranch life, particularly during the winter months?" Her response demonstrated mature understanding of the challenges she would be accepting, while expressing confidence in her ability to adapt to circumstances that would test both her healing abilities and her personal resilience. "I am not afraid of hard work or difficult healing challenges. Cherokee people understand that helping others sometimes requires accepting circumstances that are not comfortable or familiar." The conversation concluded with Standing Bear's formal presentation of the terms that would govern the arrangement, delivered with the dignity appropriate to important tribal decisions. "If you will provide shelter, food, and respect for my granddaughters Cherokee identity, she will share her healing knowledge and help maintain your household. The $5 will purchase supplies she needs for her healing work." Samuel's acceptance of the arrangement was delivered with reciprocal formality that acknowledged the significance of the commitment he was making to people whose cultural traditions he did not fully understand, but had learned to respect during their brief meeting. "I agree to those terms. Little Dove will be treated as a valued member of my household, with freedom to practice her healing methods and maintain her Cherokee customs. The handshake between Samuel and Standing Bear sealed an agreement that both men understood would test their respective assumptions about cultural cooperation while potentially providing solutions to problems that had seemed impossible to resolve. Through conventional means. As Little Dove gathered her modest belongings and prepared to accompany Samuel to the Hayes Ranch, her quiet dignity and obvious intelligence had already begun to challenge his expectations about what their arrangement might involve. The sick Cherokee woman he had expected to purchase for $5 had proven to be a sophisticated individual whose healing knowledge and cultural wisdom might indeed provide the salvation his dying ranch desperately needed. The wagon journey back to the Hayes Ranch passed in thoughtful silence as Samuel and Little Dove navigated the awkwardness of two strangers who had committed to sharing living space despite knowing virtually nothing about each other's daily habits, personal preferences, or cultural expectations. The autumn landscape that rolled past them, golden fields broken by stands of oak and pine, provided a neutral backdrop for their mutual assessment of what they had undertaken. Little Dove sat with quiet composure beside Samuel on the wagon seat, her small bundle of personal possessions secured carefully at her feet, along with a leather pouch that contained what she had described as essential healing materials. Occasionally she would study the passing terrain with the focused attention of someone cataloging the natural resources available for her traditional medicine practice, pointing out specific plants whose Cherokee names she murmured softly to herself. "Those roots by the creek," she said during one of these observations, gesturing toward a patch of vegetation near a small stream they crossed, "contain strong medicine for animals whose spirits have become confused by sickness. My grandmother called them little helpers because they guide other medicines to where they are needed most." The explanation provided Samuel with his first glimpse into the sophisticated botanical knowledge that Cherokee healing traditions had developed over centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Her ability to identify useful plants from a moving wagon suggested practical expertise that went far beyond the mystical concept she had described at Bradshaw's Trading Post. As they approached the ranch house, Samuel found himself seeing his property through Little Dove's eyes, noting the obvious signs of decline that months of single-handed management had created, but also recognizing the underlying potential that had originally attracted him and Margaret to this particular location. The rolling pastures, reliable water sources, and natural shelter provided by established oak groves created an environment that might indeed support the kind of holistic, healing approach that Cherokee medicine emphasized. "Your land has good spirits," Little Dove observed as Samuel guided the wagon up the final hill toward the ranch house, "but they are troubled by the sickness that affects your animals. The harmony between earth and sky has been disturbed, creating conditions that allow disease to flourish where health should naturally prevail." Her assessment combined practical observation of environmental factors with spiritual interpretations that reflected Cherokee understanding of the interconnected relationships between all living things. Samuel found himself intrigued by her holistic perspective, even though it challenged the mechanistic approach to problem-solving that his ranching experience had typically employed. The ranch house itself presented immediate challenges for accommodating Little Dove's cultural needs while maintaining the practical arrangements necessary for their unusual living situation. Samuel had prepared the small room that had once served as Margaret's sewing space, installing a simple bed and washstand while trying to create domestic accommodations that would be both comfortable and respectful of Cherokee customs. "This will serve well," Little Dove said as she examined the room Samuel had prepared, her tone reflecting satisfaction with his efforts to provide adequate privacy while ensuring easy access to the main areas of the house. "I will need space near the kitchen for preparing healing medicines, and a place outside where I can conduct ceremonies that restore balance between the human and natural worlds." The specific requirements highlighted the cultural complexity of their arrangement while providing Samuel with concrete tasks that could help them establish functional routines. Her requests were reasonable and demonstrated consideration for his existing household patterns while maintaining the Cherokee practices necessary for her healing work. That first afternoon provided an immediate test of Little Dove's claimed abilities. As she accompanied Samuel to examine the cattle that were exhibiting the most advanced symptoms of the mysterious disease, the sight of animals that had once been healthy specimens reduced to skeletal shadows of their former strength visibly affected her, though she approached the suffering livestock with the kind of focused attention that suggested professional assessment rather than simple emotional response. These animals carried deep spiritual wounds, she said after spending several minutes observing the cattle's behavior and physical condition. The sickness attacks not only their bodies, but their connection to the life force that maintains health. Western medicine treats symptoms, but Cherokee healing must restore the broken harmony that allows disease to take root. Her diagnostic approach involved methods that seemed foreign to Samuel's experience with conventional veterinary practice. She studied the animal's eyes for signs of spiritual distress, examined their breathing patterns for disruptions in their connection to natural rhythms, and spent considerable time simply sitting quietly among the cattle while observing their interactions with each other and their environment. The healing cannot begin until I understand what has broken the natural balance, Little Dove explained when Samuel expressed concern about the time she was spending on observation rather than immediate treatment. Cherokee medicine requires patience because it addresses causes rather than simply suppressing symptoms that will return if underlying problems are not resolved. Her methodical approach challenged Samuel's urgent desire for quick solutions to his crisis, but her obvious expertise and systematic thinking provided reassurance that she was indeed applying sophisticated knowledge rather than simply delaying action due to uncertainty about effective treatments. The evening meal provided their first opportunity for extended conversation about their respective backgrounds and the cultural adjustments their living arrangement would require. Little Dove demonstrated impressive adaptability by preparing a simple but nutritious dinner using ingredients from Samuel's limited pantry while incorporating cooking techniques that reflected Cherokee traditions for maintaining spiritual balance. Through proper food preparation, my grandmother taught me that healing begins with the food we eat, she explained as she served a stew that combined familiar ingredients in ways that created unexpectedly complex and satisfying flavors. When the body receives proper nourishment, it becomes strong enough to resist sickness and help others who suffer from spiritual imbalance. The meal provided Samuel with evidence of Little Dove's practical domestic skills while introducing him to Cherokee approaches to nutrition that emphasized the spiritual dimensions of food preparation and consumption. Her cooking was both delicious and culturally educational, offering insights into traditional knowledge systems that had sustained Native American communities for generations. Their dinner conversation revealed the personal history that had shaped Little Dove's current circumstances and her willingness to accept such an unusual living arrangement. She had been married briefly to a Cherokee man who had died in a hunting accident, leaving her childless and dependent on extended family support during a period when her own ill health made it difficult for her to contribute fully to tribal economic activities. My husband dreamed of creating a ranch where Cherokee and white families could work together, she said with quiet sadness that reflected genuine grief for her lost future. He believed that both peoples had knowledge that could help each other if they were willing to share rather than fight. When he died, his dream seemed to die with him until I met you and saw your sick animals. The revelation that she viewed their arrangement as potentially fulfilling her late husband's vision for cultural cooperation added emotional depth to their practical partnership while providing Samuel with understanding of her motivations that went beyond simple economic necessity or healing practice. Samuel found himself sharing details of his own loss and the financial pressures that had led him to consider Webb's proposal. creating a foundation of mutual understanding based on shared experience with grief and the practical challenges of rebuilding life after devastating personal losses. Margaret had dreams too, he admitted, speaking his wife's name aloud for the first time since Little Dove's arrival. She wanted our ranch to be a place where families could prosper regardless of their background, where hard work and fair dealing mattered more than prejudice or social position. I suppose that's part of why I was willing to consider your grandfather's proposal. The discovery that both had lost spouses whose visions for cultural harmony aligned with their current situation created an unexpected bond that transcended the commercial nature of their original arrangement. Their shared commitment to honoring their deceased partner's dreams provided emotional foundation for the practical cooperation their healing work would require. The following morning brought Little Dove's first systematic attempt to treat Samuel's sick cattle using traditional Cherokee healing methods. She began by gathering specific plants she had identified during her initial survey of the ranch property, explaining the medicinal properties of each as she carefully harvested leaves, roots, and bark according to traditional protocols that respected the spiritual essence of each plant. "This is red willow bark," she said, demonstrating proper harvesting techniques that ensured the tree's continued health while obtaining necessary medicinal materials. "It contains natural medicine for pain and inflammation, but Cherokee healing uses it primarily to restore spiritual balance in animals whose life force has become disconnected from natural harmony." Her botanical expertise was evident in her ability to locate and identify useful plants, even during the late autumn season, when many species had entered their dormant winter phase. The knowledge she demonstrated had clearly been accumulated over years of careful study and practical application, validating her claims about traditional healing abilities. The preparation of Cherokee medicines required equipment and techniques that challenged the limitations of Samuel's ranch house kitchen, leading to creative adaptations that combined traditional methods with available resources. Little Dove established a workspace that respected Cherokee protocols while functioning effectively within the constraints of frontier household arrangements. "Cherokee healing requires ceremony as well as medicine," she explained while preparing her first treatment for the sick cattle. "The spiritual healing begins when we acknowledge our connection to all living things and ask the plant spirits to share their power with the animal spirits that need restoration." The ceremonial aspects of her healing practice initially made Samuel uncomfortable due to their obvious differences from the Christian traditions that had shaped his religious understanding. However, his desperation to save his cattle motivated him to participate respectfully in unfamiliar rituals that might provide the miraculous intervention his conventional approaches had failed to achieve. Little Dove's first healing ceremony took place at sunset in the pasture where the sickest cattle gathered, combining the practical administration of herbal medicines with Cherokee prayers and songs that were designed to restore spiritual harmony between all participants in the healing process. Her voice carrying traditional melodies across the evening landscape created an atmosphere of solemn purpose that impressed Samuel with its obvious sincerity and cultural significance. The immediate results of her initial treatment were not dramatically visible, though the cattle appeared calmer and more alert following her ministrations. Little Dove explained that Cherokee healing typically required multiple treatments over extended periods, as spiritual restoration could not be rushed without undermining the deep changes necessary for permanent recovery. "White medicine expects quick results because it treats only physical symptoms," she said when Samuel expressed concern about the gradual nature of her approach. "Cherokee healing addresses spiritual causes that developed over long periods, requiring patience and faith in natural processes that restore health from within, rather than simply suppressing disease from outside." Her explanation challenged Samuel's expectations while providing a framework for understanding the time commitment that traditional healing methods would require. The investment in gradual but thorough recovery appealed to his long-term thinking. about ranch management while testing his ability to maintain hope during the extended treatment period that lay ahead. 3 weeks into November, the first tangible signs of improvement began to manifest in ways that challenged everything Samuel had previously understood about livestock recovery and traditional healing methods. The changes were subtle initially. Cattle that had stood motionless for weeks began moving more freely around their pastures, and the dull, lifeless eyes that had characterized the advanced stages of their illness started showing renewed alertness and awareness of their surroundings. Little Dove's persistent cough had also begun to subside during this period, though she attributed her improving health to the ranch's clean air and the spiritual satisfaction she derived from practicing her healing arts in an environment where her traditional knowledge was valued rather than dismissed as primitive superstition. The correlation between her personal recovery and her success in treating Samuel's cattle suggested complex connections that went beyond simple coincidence. Cherokee healing teaches that the healer's own spiritual balance affects her ability to help others, she explained one morning as they observed a young bull that had regained enough strength to challenge other animals for access to the best grazing spots. When my own life force was weakened by grief and sickness, I could not channel healing energy effectively. Living here, practicing medicine that honors my grandmother's teachings, has restored my connection to the power that makes healing possible. Her growing confidence was evident not only in her increasingly effective treatments, but also in her expanding role within the ranch's daily operations. What had begun as a simple arrangement for treating sick cattle had evolved into genuine partnership as Little Dove applied Cherokee knowledge to various aspects of ranch management that benefited from traditional approaches to working with natural systems rather than fighting against them. The kitchen garden she had established behind the ranch house demonstrated practical applications of Cherokee agricultural techniques that produced more abundant and nutritious crops than Samuel's previous attempts at vegetable gardening. Her systematic approach to soil preparation, seed selection, and companion planting created a productive food source that reduced their dependence on expensive store-bought provisions while providing ingredients for both culinary and medicinal purposes. White farmers fight the land, trying to force it to produce what they want, Little Dove observed as she harvested late-season vegetables that continued thriving despite increasingly cold temperatures. Cherokee methods work with natural patterns, supporting the earth's own desire to create abundance when treated with respect and understanding. Her agricultural success provided concrete evidence of traditional knowledge systems that could complement, rather than compete with European farming techniques, creating opportunities for improved productivity that served practical economic interests while honoring indigenous wisdom about sustainable land management practices. Samuel found himself increasingly impressed by the breadth of Little Dove's traditional education and her ability to adapt Cherokee methods to the specific challenges of Texas ranching. Her understanding of weather patterns, seasonal changes, and animal behavior reflected sophisticated knowledge that had been accumulated through generations of careful observation and practical experimentation by people whose survival depended on accurate understanding of natural processes. The healing ceremony she conducted twice weekly had evolved into community events that drew the ranch's wildlife into participation through their obvious attraction to the peaceful energy her prayers and songs created in the evening landscape. Deer, rabbits, and various bird species began gathering at the edges of the pastures during her healing sessions, as if the spiritual harmony she invoked extended benefits beyond the cattle to all living creatures within the ranch's boundaries. Animals understand healing energy more clearly than most humans, Little Dove explained when Samuel commented on the wildlife's unusual behavior during her ceremonies. They do not question whether traditional medicine will work, they simply accept the restoration of balance and allow their bodies to respond naturally to spiritual healing. Her observation challenged Samuel's residual skepticism about Cherokee healing methods while providing evidence that her traditional practices created measurable changes in the ranch's entire ecosystem. The return of healthy wildlife to areas that had been largely abandoned during the cattle disease outbreak suggested environmental recovery that paralleled the livestock's gradual return to health. The financial implications of the cattle's recovery were becoming increasingly significant as November progressed and Samuel realized that his ranch might indeed survive the crisis that had threatened to destroy everything he and Margaret had built together. The animals that had seemed destined for death were now gaining weight, exhibiting normal social behaviors and showing reproductive interest that promised future generations of healthy livestock. Thomas Mitchell from the Cherokee County Bank made an unexpected visit during this period, ostensibly to discuss Samuel's overdue loan payments, but actually to assess the ranch's current condition and prospects for financial recovery. Mitchell's obvious surprise at finding healthy cattle where he had expected continued devastation provided Samuel with considerable satisfaction about his decision to trust Little Dove's traditional healing methods. "Samuel, I have to admit I'm impressed," Mitchell said as they toured the pastures where recovered cattle grazed contentedly among the autumn grass. "When I last visited, your situation looked hopeless. Whatever you've done to turn things around has been remarkably effective. The bank will be happy to restructure your loans based on these improved circumstances." The banker's acknowledgement of the ranch's recovery validated Samuel's faith in Little Dove's abilities while providing relief from the financial pressures that had dominated his thinking for months. The prospect of maintaining ownership of his property and continuing the work he and Margaret had begun together offered hope for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. However, Mitchell's visit also introduced complications that Samuel had not anticipated when he agreed to Little Dove's healing work. The banker's curiosity about the methods Samuel had used to save his cattle led to questions about Little Dove's presence on the ranch and her role in the remarkable recovery that had impressed everyone familiar with the severity of the original crisis. "I've heard rumors that you've got some kind of Indian woman helping with your cattle," Mitchell said with the kind of casual prejudice that characterized many white settlers' attitudes toward Native Americans. "I hope you're not getting involved with anything that might cause problems with your neighbors or local authorities." The warning reflected broader social tensions about appropriate relationships between white ranchers and Native American individuals, particularly arrangements that might be interpreted as challenging established racial hierarchies or cultural boundaries. Samuel realized that Little Dove's success in healing his cattle could potentially create unwanted attention from community members who viewed Cherokee traditional practices with suspicion or hostility. "Little Dove is a skilled healer whose knowledge has saved my ranch," Samuel replied with more firmness than he had intended, surprising himself with the protective instinct that her presence had awakened. "Whatever arrangements I make for managing my property are my own business, as long as they don't violate any laws or cause harm to my neighbors." His defensive response revealed the depth of respect and gratitude that Little Dove's successful healing work had created, transforming what had begun as a desperate commercial transaction into genuine appreciation for her abilities and her character. Samuel found himself unwilling to tolerate criticism or prejudice directed toward someone whose traditional knowledge had provided solutions that educated white professionals had been unable to offer. The conversation with Mitchell forced Samuel to confront the social implications of his growing partnership with Little Dove and the potential consequences of their unconventional arrangement becoming widely known throughout Cherokee County. The success of her healing methods made concealment increasingly difficult, particularly as other ranchers began inquiring about his remarkable recovery from what had appeared to be certain disaster. Little Dove's own awareness of these social complications was evident in her careful maintenance of appropriate boundaries that respected both Cherokee cultural protocols and white social expectations. She continued to occupy her separate living space, participated in healing ceremonies that honored traditional spiritual practices, and avoided public appearances that might generate uncomfortable attention or speculation about the nature of their relationship. "I understand that my presence here creates difficulties for you with your own people," she said during one of their evening conversations about ranch management and future planning. Cherokee people also face criticism from tribal members who question arrangements with white settlers, even when such cooperation serves beneficial purposes for everyone involved. Her acknowledgement of the mutual social pressures they were both navigating demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the complex cultural dynamics that surrounded their partnership, while expressing willingness to accept whatever constraints might be necessary for maintaining their successful collaboration. The approaching winter season created new challenges for maintaining the cattle's recovered health while continuing the healing protocols that had proven so effective during the previous months. Little Dove's traditional knowledge included seasonal adjustments to medicinal treatments that accounted for changing weather patterns and the livestock's evolving nutritional needs as they entered the dormant period that characterized Texas winters. "Winter healing requires different medicines and ceremonies," she explained as she gathered the last useful plants before the first hard frost eliminated access to fresh botanical materials. "Cold season treatments focus on maintaining inner warmth and spiritual strength that sustain health during the time when Earth's healing power rests beneath the snow." Her systematic approach to seasonal medicine demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of cyclical natural processes that Cherokee healing traditions had developed through centuries of practical application in varied climatic conditions. The knowledge she possessed about maintaining livestock health during winter months proved particularly valuable given Samuel's limited experience with managing large herds. During his few years of ranching, the storage and preservation techniques she employed for maintaining medicinal plant supplies throughout the winter months introduced Samuel to traditional Cherokee methods for extending the availability of natural remedies during periods when fresh materials were unavailable. Her expertise in drying, processing, and combining various botanical medicines created a pharmacy of natural treatments that could address multiple health challenges throughout the cold season. As December approached, the transformation of the Hayes Ranch from a dying operation into a thriving example of successful livestock management had become impossible to conceal from the broader community. Neighboring ranchers who had heard about Samuel's remarkable recovery began making informal visits to observe the healthy cattle that had replaced the skeletal animals they remembered from previous months. These visits created opportunities for Little Dove to demonstrate Cherokee healing methods to skeptical audiences while maintaining the careful cultural boundaries that protected both her traditional practices and Samuel's social standing within the white ranching community. Her dignified presentation of indigenous knowledge challenged prevailing prejudices while avoiding direct confrontation with established social hierarchies. The success of her healing work had begun attracting attention from other ranchers facing similar livestock challenges, creating possibilities for expanding the application of Cherokee traditional medicine throughout Cherokee County while generating additional income that could further secure the ranch's financial stability and Little Dove's position within their partnership. The first serious challenge to Samuel and Little Dove's partnership arrived on a cold December morning in the form of Sheriff William Crawford and 3 members of the Jacksonville Town Council, their official delegation conveying the kind of stern authority that small-town leaders wielded when they believed community standards were being violated by residents whose behavior challenged established social norms. Sheriff Crawford was a heavy-set man in his 50s whose long experience in law enforcement had been shaped more by political considerations than legal principles, making him particularly sensitive to community pressure from influential citizens who viewed Cherokee healing practices as potentially dangerous superstition that threatened proper Christian values and racial boundaries. The delegation's arrival at the Hayes Ranch was clearly intended as an intimidation tactic designed to pressure Samuel into discontinuing his arrangement with Little Dove before their successful partnership could inspire other white settlers to seek similar cooperation with Native American traditional knowledge systems. The timing of their visit, during the coldest week of the year, emphasized their determination to address what they perceived as a growing problem. "Samuel Hayes," Sheriff Crawford announced as he and his companions approached the ranch house, their formal tone suggesting official business rather than neighborly concern. "We've received reports about activities on your property that may be violating county ordinances regarding unlicensed medical practice and inappropriate cohabitation arrangements." The accusations were deliberately vague but carried clear implications about both the legitimacy of Little Dove's healing work and the propriety of their living situation. Samuel recognized the political motivation behind their visit while understanding that ignoring official concerns could create legal complications that might threaten everything he and Little Dove had accomplished together. "Sheriff Crawford," Samuel replied with careful courtesy that concealed his anger about the invasion of his privacy, "I'm not aware of any county ordinances that govern how I manage my ranch or treat my livestock. Little Dove is a skilled healer whose knowledge has saved animals that white veterinarians couldn't help." His measured response avoided direct confrontation while asserting his right to make independent decisions about his property and business operations. The emphasis on Little Dove's superior results compared to conventional veterinary treatment challenged the delegation's assumption that white medical approaches were inherently more legitimate than Cherokee traditional methods. Council member Harrison Fletcher, a prominent local merchant whose political influence derived from his control of credit relationships with numerous ranch families, stepped forward with the kind of condescending authority that characterized his interactions with people whose financial circumstances made them vulnerable to economic pressure. "Samuel, we understand that you've faced difficult circumstances since Margaret's death," Fletcher said with false sympathy that poorly concealed his disapproval of Samuel's choices. "However, allowing an Indian woman to practice witchcraft on your property sets a dangerous precedent that could encourage other settlers to abandon Christian principles in favor of savage superstitions." The characterization of Cherokee healing as witchcraft revealed the profound ignorance and racial prejudice that motivated the delegation's intervention, while their reference to Margaret suggested an attempt to manipulate Samuel's grief for political purposes. The implication that his beloved wife would have disapproved of Little Dove's presence was particularly offensive, given Margaret's own expressed hopes for cultural cooperation and understanding. Little Dove appeared at the kitchen door during this confrontation, her dignified presence providing visual contradiction to the delegation's characterization of Cherokee people as savage practitioners of dangerous superstition. Her neat appearance, obvious intelligence, and quiet composure challenged every stereotype the visiting officials had used to justify their interference in Samuel's private affairs. "Gentlemen," she said with the kind of formal courtesy that demonstrated her missionary education while maintaining Cherokee cultural dignity, "I am Mary Little Dove, granddaughter of Joseph Standing Bear. I practice traditional Cherokee healing methods that have served my people for many generations. These methods have successfully treated Mr. Hayes's cattle when other approaches failed." Her direct introduction and professional presentation of her credentials forced the delegation to confront the individual humanity of someone they had preferred to characterize as a faceless representative of primitive culture. The contrast between their expectations and her actual appearance created visible discomfort among officials, who had arrived expecting to deal with a simple case of inappropriate behavior. Council member James Morrison, a retired military officer whose service during the Indian Wars had shaped his attitudes toward Native Americans, responded with the kind of military bluntness that characterized his approach to what he viewed as security issues affecting community welfare and racial stability. "Miss, your people's medicine might work for Indians, but white folk need proper medical care from licensed professionals. Morrison declared with obvious contempt for traditional knowledge systems. What you're doing here amounts to practicing veterinary medicine without proper credentials, which violates territorial regulations about professional licensing. The legal argument represented an attempt to use bureaucratic technicalities to shut down healing practices that had proven more effective than licensed veterinary care, demonstrating the lengths to which prejudiced officials would go to maintain racial hierarchies that privileged white professional authority over Native American traditional expertise. Samuel's response reflected growing anger at the delegation's disrespectful treatment of someone whose knowledge and character he had learned to value during their months of partnership. Gentlemen, Little Dove's healing methods have saved my ranch from financial ruin. I don't see how anyone can object to treatments that work better than anything your licensed professionals were able to provide. His defense of Little Dove's abilities included implicit criticism of Dr. Crawford's repeated failures to treat the cattle disease, creating political complications for Sheriff Crawford, who shared the veterinarian surname and had personal, as well as professional reasons for supporting conventional medical authority against Cherokee traditional practices. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of neighboring rancher Robert Anderson, whose own cattle had recently begun showing symptoms similar to those that had previously devastated Samuel's herd. Anderson's timing was fortuitous, as his desperate search for effective treatment provided immediate evidence of the practical benefits that Cherokee healing knowledge could offer to the broader ranching community. "Samuel," Anderson called out as he approached the group gathered in front of the ranch house, "I heard that you found someone who could cure that cattle sickness that's been killing livestock throughout the county. My animals are starting to show the same symptoms, and I'm hoping you might be able to help." The rancher's urgent request for assistance created an awkward situation for the delegation, who found themselves opposing healing practices that another community member desperately needed. Anderson's reputation as a successful businessman and respected neighbor made it difficult for the officials to maintain their position that Cherokee medicine represented a threat to community welfare. Little Dove's response to Anderson's request demonstrated the professional discretion that characterized her approach to healing work, while also revealing her understanding of the political sensitivity surrounding her practice of traditional medicine in a white community. "Mr. Anderson," she said respectfully, "I would be willing to examine your cattle and recommend treatments if you believe Cherokee healing methods might be helpful. However, you should understand that some people question the legitimacy of traditional knowledge, and seeking my help might create social complications for your family." Her honest acknowledgement of potential social consequences reflected mature understanding of the prejudice that surrounded Cherokee healing practices, while her willingness to help despite official opposition demonstrated commitment to serving anyone who needed her traditional knowledge, regardless of political pressures. Anderson's response revealed the pragmatic attitude that characterized successful ranchers who prioritized practical results over social conformity when their economic survival was at stake. "Miss, I don't care what methods you use as long as they save my cattle. I've got too much invested in those animals to let them die because of other people's prejudices." The exchange between Little Dove and Anderson provided the delegation with clear evidence that Cherokee healing practices were attracting interest from other respected community members, undermining their argument that Samuel's arrangement represented an isolated case of poor judgment, rather than a potentially beneficial innovation that could serve legitimate community needs. Sheriff Crawford's frustration with the developing situation was evident in his attempt to reassert official authority through threats of legal action that might intimidate both Samuel and Anderson into abandoning their interest in Cherokee healing methods. "Mr. Anderson, I strongly advise you to reconsider seeking medical treatment from unlicensed practitioners," Crawford warned with the kind of official bluster that he hoped would override practical considerations about treatment effectiveness. "The county cannot be held responsible for consequences that result from ignoring proper medical protocols." The warning created a moment of tension as Anderson weighed his desperate need for effective treatment against potential legal complications that might result from defying official recommendations. His decision would influence whether Cherokee healing knowledge could expand its beneficial influence throughout the community or remain limited to Samuel's private arrangement with Little Dove. Little Dove's intervention during this crucial moment demonstrated both cultural wisdom and practical diplomacy that offered solutions, serving everyone's legitimate interests, while respecting the political constraints that governed interracial cooperation in Cherokee County. Perhaps, she suggested quietly, Mr. Anderson could consult with Dr. Crawford first, and I could work with the doctor to combine Cherokee knowledge with white medicine in ways that respect both traditional healing and official medical protocols. The proposal for collaboration between Cherokee, traditional healing, and conventional veterinary medicine offered a face-saving compromise that could allow officials to maintain their authority while enabling desperate ranchers to access effective treatments for problems that licensed professionals had been unable to solve. Dr. Crawford's absence from the delegation made immediate response to this diplomatic proposal impossible. But the suggestion itself demonstrated Little Dove's sophisticated understanding of the political navigation required for successful cultural cooperation in communities where racial prejudice created obstacles to practical problem-solving. Council Member Fletcher's rejection of collaborative approaches revealed the underlying racial motivations that drove official opposition to Cherokee healing practices, making clear that their concerns went beyond simple questions about professional licensing or medical effectiveness. The issue isn't whether Indian remedies work, Fletcher declared with brutal honesty about his true motivations, but whether allowing such practices encourages dangerous precedents about the relationship between white settlers and native populations. We cannot permit arrangements that suggest equality between civilized medicine and savage superstitions. The explicit racial language exposed the prejudice that motivated official interference while providing Samuel and Little Dove with clear understanding of the ideological opposition they faced from community leaders who viewed their successful partnership as a threat to established social hierarchies. Samuel's response to Fletcher's racist declaration marked a definitive moment in his own personal development, as he chose to defend principles of justice and human dignity over social conformity and economic security. "Mr. Fletcher," Samuel said with quiet intensity that conveyed deep moral conviction, "Little Dove possesses knowledge and skills that have saved my ranch and could help other families facing similar crises. I will not allow prejudice and ignorance to prevent people from accessing healing methods that work better than anything your civilized medicine has been able to provide." His principled stand against community pressure represented a transformation from the lonely, desperate widower who had originally sought Little Dove's help into someone willing to risk everything to protect both her dignity and the practical benefits her traditional knowledge could provide to anyone who needed healing that conventional methods could not offer. The confrontation with the town council reached its breaking point when Dr. William Crawford finally arrived at the Hayes Ranch, his medical bag in hand and his professional pride visibly wounded by reports that Cherokee healing methods had succeeded where his university training had failed. The veterinarian's presence transformed the political dispute into a direct challenge between competing approaches to healing that would determine whether traditional knowledge could coexist with conventional medicine in Cherokee County. Dr. Crawford was a man whose entire identity had been built upon the scientific superiority of European medical training, making Little Dove's success a personal affront that threatened both his professional reputation and his fundamental beliefs about the relationship between civilized knowledge and primitive superstition. His arrival at the ranch carried the weight of institutional authority determined to reassert control over medical practice in the community. "I understand there are cattle here that have supposedly been cured through Indian remedies," Dr. Crawford announced with the kind of skeptical condescension that characterized his attitude toward any healing methods he had not learned in medical school. I'd like to examine these animals myself to determine what kind of treatment they've actually received. His demand for personal examination of Samuel's recovered cattle represented both professional curiosity and defensive skepticism about claims that traditional Cherokee healing had accomplished what his own extensive veterinary knowledge had been unable to achieve. The challenge was delivered with barely concealed hostility toward Little Dove's presence and her presumptuous success in his area of expertise. Little Dove's response demonstrated the quiet confidence that had characterized her approach to all professional challenges since arriving at the Hayes Ranch. "Dr. Crawford, I welcome your examination of the cattle we have treated. Cherokee healing has nothing to hide from scientific observation, and perhaps we might learn from each other's knowledge." Her gracious invitation for professional collaboration contrasted sharply with Crawford's combative attitude, immediately establishing her as the more mature and reasonable participant in what promised to be a tense evaluation of competing medical philosophies. Her willingness to submit her results to scientific scrutiny demonstrated confidence in Cherokee healing methods while offering opportunities for the kind of cultural exchange that could benefit both traditional and conventional approaches. Examination of Samuel's cattle took place under the watchful eyes of the entire delegation, creating a formal test of Cherokee healing effectiveness that would either validate Little Dove's traditional knowledge or expose her methods as ineffective folk medicine that had coincidentally coincided with natural recovery processes. Dr. Crawford's systematic examination of the recovered animals revealed his grudging amazement at their obvious health and vitality, though his professional pride prevented him from immediately acknowledging the effectiveness of treatments he had not prescribed or understood. The cattle that had been near death just months earlier now exhibited all the characteristics of healthy livestock, challenging his assumptions about what constituted legitimate medical intervention. "These animals certainly appear to be in excellent condition," Crawford admitted with obvious reluctance, his scientific training compelling honesty despite his personal and professional resistance to crediting Cherokee healing methods. "However, I would need to understand the specific treatments used before I could assess whether traditional remedies were actually responsible for their recovery." His demand for detailed explanation of Little Dove's healing protocols provided an opportunity for genuine medical education that could bridge the gap between traditional Cherokee knowledge and conventional veterinary practice. Assuming both parties could overcome their cultural prejudices sufficiently to engage in meaningful professional exchange, Little Dove's detailed explanation of her healing approach revealed the sophisticated understanding of animal health that Cherokee medicine had developed through centuries of practical application and careful observation of natural healing processes. Her description of how spiritual imbalance contributed to physical illness challenged Crawford's mechanistic understanding while providing insights that could enhance conventional veterinary care. Cherokee healing recognizes that animals, like humans, are spiritual beings whose physical health depends on harmony between their life force and the natural world. She explained with the kind of systematic clarity that demonstrated her own sophisticated education. When this spiritual balance is disrupted by environmental stress, poor nutrition, or emotional trauma, the body becomes vulnerable to diseases that cannot be cured through physical treatments alone. The philosophical framework she presented offered Crawford new perspectives on animal health that his medical training had not addressed, creating opportunities for expanded understanding that could improve treatment outcomes for both Cherokee traditional healing and conventional veterinary practice. However, the educational exchange was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Marcus Webb, whose unexpected return to Cherokee County brought shocking revelations about Little Dove's true identity and the circumstances that had led to her presence at Bradshaw's trading post. Webb's nervous demeanor and obvious anxiety suggested that he carried information that could fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the situation they had been debating. "Folks," Webb announced with the kind of desperate urgency that indicated serious trouble, "I've got something to tell you about Little Dove that changes everything about this situation. She's not who you think she is, and I've been carrying a secret that could get us all in serious trouble with federal authorities." His dramatic revelation created immediate tension among the assembled officials, who recognized that federal involvement in their local dispute could create complications far beyond their ability to manage through county-level political pressure. The suggestion that Little Dove's identity involved federal concerns transformed their harassment of Samuel's healing arrangement into potentially more serious legal territory. Sheriff Crawford's demand for immediate explanation reflected both official authority and personal anxiety about how federal complications might affect his own political standing within the county law enforcement hierarchy. "Webb, you'd better explain exactly what you're talking about, and it better be the truth." This time, Webb's confession revealed the elaborate deception he had maintained about Little Dove's background and the true circumstances that had brought her to Cherokee County seeking refuge from dangers that extended far beyond simple family economic hardship. "Little Dove isn't just any Cherokee woman," Webb explained with obvious fear about the consequences of his deception. "She's the daughter of Chief Joseph Standing Bear, one of the most respected tribal leaders in the Indian Territory. She was traveling to Washington as part of an official delegation when their group was attacked by outlaws who didn't recognize her importance." The revelation that Little Dove was the daughter of a prominent Cherokee chief transformed everyone's understanding of her status and the political implications of her presence in Cherokee County. Her educated manner and sophisticated knowledge suddenly made sense as the result of high-level tribal leadership rather than simply exceptional personal development. During the attack, she was separated from her escort and found by a Cherokee family who didn't recognize her identity. Webb continued with growing desperation to explain his role in the complicated situation. "They were afraid to travel with someone whose disappearance might bring federal investigation to their struggling community, so they asked me to help find her a safe place to recover until arrangements could be made for her return to tribal leadership." The complex political circumstances surrounding Little Dove's arrival in Cherokee County revealed the dangerous nature of Webb's well-intentioned but ultimately deceptive attempt to provide protection for someone whose safety was a matter of federal concern and tribal diplomatic importance. Samuel's shock at learning Little Dove's true identity was compounded by his realization that he had been harboring the daughter of a major Cherokee leader without understanding the potential consequences for both of them. His simple arrangement for healing sick cattle had unknowingly involved him in tribal politics and federal relations that could affect diplomatic relationships throughout the Indian Territory. Little Dove's response to Webb's revelation demonstrated both relief at having her true identity disclosed and concern about how the knowledge might affect her relationship with Samuel and her ability to continue the healing work that had become central to her recovery from personal trauma and professional isolation. "Samuel," she said with the quiet dignity that had characterized all her interactions at the ranch, "I did not intend to deceive you about my identity. I used the name my adoptive family provided because I feared that revealing my father's position might create complications that could endanger both of us." Her explanation revealed the protective motivation behind her deception while acknowledging the trust issues that her concealed identity had created in their partnership. The admission that she was Chief Standing Bear's daughter added complexity to their relationship while explaining her sophisticated education and cultural knowledge. Dr. Crawford's response to these revelations reflected his recognition that treating the daughter of a prominent Cherokee chief as a primitive practitioner of savage superstition could create serious political problems for everyone involved in the county's harassment of her healing activities. If Little Dove is Chief Standing Bear's daughter, then she represents official Cherokee medical knowledge rather than folk remedies practiced by uneducated tribal members. Crawford admitted with obvious recalculation of his professional assessment. Her healing methods would carry the authority of established tribal leadership rather than simply individual traditional practice. The political implications of Little Dove's true identity forced all the county officials to reconsider their opposition to Cherokee healing methods. As harassment of a chief's daughter could create federal investigations that might expose the racial prejudice motivating their interference in Samuel's legitimate business arrangements. Sheriff Crawford's anxiety about federal complications was evident in his immediate shift from aggressive enforcement of county ordinances to diplomatic concern about maintaining peaceful relationships with tribal leadership. Miss Standing Bear, we had no idea about your father's position or the official nature of your healing knowledge. Perhaps we should discuss how the county can support your work rather than creating unnecessary complications. The dramatic change in official attitude demonstrated the political opportunism that had motivated their original harassment while revealing how quickly prejudiced positions could be abandoned when they threatened to create serious consequences for county leadership. However, the most significant impact of the revelation about Little Dove's identity was its effect on her relationship with Samuel, as both recognized that her high-status background created new questions about the appropriateness and sustainability of their partnership at the isolated ranch. "Samuel," Little Dove said with obvious emotion, "learning about my true identity should not change the healing work we have accomplished together, or the partnership we have built through mutual respect and shared commitment to helping others." Her statement reflected deep feeling that had developed during their months of collaboration, suggesting that their relationship had evolved far beyond the simple commercial arrangement that had originally brought them together into something that transcended cultural boundaries and social expectations. 2 days after Webb's explosive revelation about Little Dove's true identity, the Hayes Ranch became the focal point for a gathering that would determine not only the future of Cherokee white relations in the county, but also the personal destiny of two people whose partnership had transcended every boundary that prejudice and tradition had erected between their worlds. Chief Joseph Standing Bear arrived at dawn with a delegation of 12 Cherokee leaders, their presence transforming Samuel's modest ranch house into an unofficial diplomatic venue where tribal authority would negotiate directly with county officials about his daughter's situation and the broader implications of Cherokee healing practices being accepted within white communities. Standing Bear was a man whose commanding presence immediately explained Little Dove's natural dignity and sophisticated intelligence. At 62 years old, he possessed the kind of weathered wisdom that came from decades of navigating the complex political landscape between Cherokee sovereignty and federal authority, making him uniquely qualified to address the cultural and legal complications that his daughter's healing work had created. "Mr. Hayes," Standing Bear said as he approached the ranch house where Samuel and Little Dove waited anxiously for whatever judgment the tribal delegation might render, "my daughter has written to me about the healing work she has accomplished here and about the respect and protection you have provided during her time of need." The formal acknowledgement carried implications that went far beyond simple gratitude, suggesting that Samuel's treatment of Little Dove had been evaluated according to Cherokee standards for appropriate behavior toward women of high tribal status. The chief's approval indicated that their partnership had successfully navigated the cultural sensitivities that could have created serious diplomatic problems. Little Dove's reunion with her father was conducted with the kind of ceremonial formality that reflected Cherokee protocols for important family interactions, though the genuine affection between them was evident despite the public nature of their meeting. Her respectful presentation of her healing accomplishments demonstrated both professional pride and cultural awareness that her work represented tribal knowledge as well as personal achievement. "Father," she said in Cherokee before switching to English for the benefit of the gathered audience, The healing spirits guided me to this place where my knowledge was needed and valued. Samuel Hayes has been a true partner who honored Cherokee wisdom while learning to understand the spiritual dimensions of healing that white medicine often ignores. Her testimony about Samuel's character and his respect for Cherokee healing traditions carried significant weight with the tribal delegation, whose evaluation of their partnership would influence not only her personal future, but also the broader possibilities for cultural cooperation between Cherokee and white communities throughout the region. Sheriff Crawford and the county officials who had previously challenged Little Dove's healing work arrived shortly after the Cherokee delegation, their obvious discomfort with the transformed political situation evident in their carefully diplomatic approach to people they had recently dismissed as practitioners of primitive superstition. Chief Standing Bear, Sheriff Crawford said with the kind of exaggerated respect that revealed his anxiety about the federal attention their harassment might have attracted. Cherokee County is honored by your presence, and we hope any misunderstandings about your daughter's activities can be resolved in ways that serve everyone's interests. The sheriff's desperate attempt at diplomatic damage control demonstrated how quickly local prejudice could be abandoned when faced with serious political consequences, though his obvious insincerity highlighted the opportunistic nature of the official's sudden conversion to cultural tolerance and respect for Cherokee healing traditions. Dr. Crawford's participation in the gathering provided an opportunity for professional dialogue about the integration of Cherokee traditional medicine with conventional veterinary practice, creating possibilities for collaborative approaches that could benefit both healing systems while serving the practical needs of ranching communities throughout Cherokee County. Chief Standing Bear, Dr. Crawford said with genuine professional interest that contrasted sharply with his previous dismissive attitude. Your daughter's healing methods have achieved results that conventional veterinary medicine was unable to provide. I believe there could be significant benefits from combining Cherokee traditional knowledge with university-trained medical practice. The veterinarian's acknowledgement of Cherokee healing effectiveness represented a crucial breakthrough in professional acceptance of traditional knowledge systems, creating precedents that could influence medical practice throughout the frontier regions where indigenous wisdom had been systematically dismissed by European-trained practitioners. However, the most significant moment in the diplomatic gathering came when Samuel stepped forward to address Chief Standing Bear directly about his personal relationship with Little Dove and his hopes for their future together. Despite the vast differences in their cultural backgrounds and social status, Chief Standing Bear, Samuel said with the kind of quiet courage that had sustained him through all the challenges of the past year, your daughter has not only saved my ranch and my livelihood, but she has also restored my faith in the possibility of partnership and mutual respect between people from different worlds. His statement carried implications that went far beyond simple gratitude for professional services, suggesting emotional connections that had developed during their months of collaboration. The carefully chosen words indicated romantic feelings, while respecting Cherokee protocols for approaching tribal leaders about matters involving their daughters. Little Dove's response to Samuel's declaration demonstrated her own deep feelings, while maintaining the cultural propriety required for such discussions within Cherokee family structures. Samuel Hayes has shown me that white men can indeed honor Cherokee wisdom and treat Native women as equals rather than possessions or curiosities. Her testimony about Samuel's character provided crucial evidence for her father's evaluation of whether their partnership represented genuine mutual respect or simply another example of white exploitation of Cherokee resources and knowledge. The distinction was critically important for tribal approval of any permanent arrangement between them. Chief Standing Bear's deliberation with his council members was conducted in Cherokee, creating suspense for the gathered audience who waited to learn whether tribal authority would support the unprecedented cultural partnership that had developed at the Hayes Ranch or require Little Dove's return to traditional Cherokee community life. the chief's final decision, delivered with the ceremonial formality appropriate to such significant cultural pronouncements, would establish precedents affecting Cherokee white relations throughout the territory while determining the personal future of two people whose love had transcended every boundary that history and prejudice had created between their peoples. Samuel Hayes, Chief Standing Bear, announced with grave dignity, "Cherokee tradition teaches that healing gifts must be used wherever they are most needed, regardless of the cultural boundaries that separate different peoples. My daughter's work here serves not only your ranch but also the larger harmony between Cherokee and white communities." The philosophical framework provided context for the chief's assessment while indicating tribal approval for Little Dove's healing work to continue at the Hayes Ranch. However, the personal implications of their relationship remained to be addressed through Cherokee protocols that balanced individual choice with family authority and tribal interests. Furthermore, the chief continued, Cherokee law recognizes marriages between tribal members and white settlers when such unions are based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than exploitation or convenience. If my daughter chooses to remain here as your wife, Cherokee people will consider her decision worthy of tribal support and blessing. The formal recognition of marriage possibilities transformed Samuel and Little Dove's professional partnership into a potential lifelong union blessed by both Cherokee tradition and white legal systems, creating opportunities for cultural cooperation that could influence frontier development throughout the region. The crisp morning air of March 15, 1888, carried the promise of spring renewal as Cherokee County prepared to witness the most extraordinary wedding ceremony in its brief history. The Hayes Ranch had been transformed overnight by the combined efforts of both Cherokee and white communities working together to create a celebration that would honor two distinct cultural traditions while establishing new precedents for interracial cooperation in the American Southwest. Chief Standing Bear had arrived 3 days earlier with a delegation of 40 Cherokee family members, tribal elders, and spiritual leaders who had traveled from across the Indian Territory to participate in his daughter's marriage to Samuel Hayes. Their presence had transformed the modest ranch into a temporary Cherokee village, with traditional lodges constructed alongside the existing buildings to accommodate the unprecedented gathering of tribal leadership. The Cherokee preparations had been conducted with ceremonial precision that reflected the diplomatic significance of the union between Mary Little Dove, Standing Bear, and Samuel Hayes. Elder women had spent days preparing traditional foods that would be served alongside the frontier feast that white neighbors had contributed, creating a culinary fusion that symbolized the cultural integration. The marriage represented. Samuel had undergone Cherokee purification ceremonies designed to prepare white men for joining tribal family structures, participating in sweat lodge rituals, and learning traditional songs that demonstrated his commitment to honoring Cherokee customs while maintaining his own cultural identity. The spiritual preparation had been conducted with solemn dignity that impressed tribal elders with Samuel's sincere respect for indigenous traditions. The white man who seeks to join Cherokee family must prove his understanding that marriage creates obligations to the entire tribal community. Elder William Kingbird had explained during Samuel's ceremonial preparation, "You will become not just Little Dove's husband, but a protector of Cherokee healing knowledge and a bridge between our peoples." The responsibility that came with marrying Chief Standing Bear's daughter extended far beyond personal happiness to include cultural stewardship that could influence Cherokee white relations throughout the territory. Samuel's acceptance of these obligations demonstrated maturity and commitment that had earned him genuine respect from tribal leaders who might otherwise have opposed their daughter's marriage to a white rancher. Mary Little Dove's own preparations had involved traditional Cherokee bridal ceremonies that honored her status as both a healer and a chief's daughter, while also acknowledging her choice to join her life with someone outside her tribal community. The cultural navigation required delicate balance between Cherokee customs and the practical realities of frontier marriage. Her wedding dress had been crafted by Cherokee women using traditional techniques and materials, but designed to accommodate the Christian ceremony that would be conducted alongside Cherokee spiritual rituals. The beadwork told the story of her healing gifts and her family lineage, while the style reflected adaptation to white cultural expectations about appropriate bridal attire. The morning of the wedding brought representatives from throughout Cherokee County and beyond, including government officials, medical professionals, and curious settlers who had heard about the unprecedented cultural cooperation developing at the Hayes Ranch. Their presence transformed the ceremony into a public demonstration of peaceful integration possibilities. Dr. Crawford arrived early with a delegation of veterinarians and medical students who had come to observe Cherokee healing methods and witness the marriage of someone whose traditional knowledge was revolutionizing their understanding of holistic medicine. His presence represented the professional legitimacy that Cherokee healing practices had achieved through Mary Little Dove's documented successes. "This wedding represents more than personal happiness," Dr. Crawford observed to his colleagues as they watched Cherokee and white families working together to prepare the ceremony site. "We're witnessing the birth of integrated medicine that could transform healthcare throughout the American frontier." The ceremony itself began at sunrise with Cherokee spiritual rituals conducted by Elder Kingbird, whose prayers in the Cherokee language created sacred space for the cross-cultural union about to take place. The traditional elements honored ancestral spirits and invoked blessings for harmony between different peoples united through love and mutual respect. Samuel participated in Cherokee rituals with dignified attention to proper protocols, demonstrating his commitment to understanding the spiritual dimensions of marriage within tribal culture. His respectful participation impressed Cherokee observers while providing white witnesses with examples of how cultural adaptation could occur without compromising personal integrity. The Christian portion of the ceremony was conducted by Reverend Matthew Thompson, whose Methodist training had been supplemented by extensive conversations with Cherokee spiritual leaders about creating integrated religious services that honored both faith traditions. The theological cooperation represented breakthrough thinking about Christianity's relationship with indigenous spirituality. "Today we celebrate not just the union of Samuel and Mary Little Dove," Reverend Thompson proclaimed during his portion of the ceremony, "but the harmony that God intends between all peoples who seek to live together in peace and mutual understanding." The religious framework provided Christian justification for cultural cooperation, while acknowledging Cherokee spiritual traditions as legitimate expressions of divine relationship rather than primitive superstitions requiring conversion or suppression. The exchange of vows combined English and Cherokee languages, with Mary Little Dove speaking first in her native tongue before repeating her promises in English for the benefit of white witnesses. Samuel's vows included Cherokee phrases he had learned during his ceremonial preparation, demonstrating linguistic respect that moved tribal elders to tears of joy. "I promise to honor Cherokee healing wisdom while sharing white ranching knowledge," Samuel declared and carefully pronounced Cherokee before switching to English, "so that our partnership serves all people who need health and prosperity regardless of their cultural background." His bilingual vows represented commitment to genuine cultural integration, rather than simple accommodation of his wife's background, indicating understanding that their marriage would require ongoing cooperation between different worldviews and traditional practices. Mary Little Dove's vows reflected similar commitment to bridging cultural differences through their partnership. "I promise to use Cherokee healing gifts in service of all communities, while learning white ways of business and education that can strengthen traditional knowledge for future generations," she declared with quiet conviction that impressed both Cherokee and white audiences. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony provided immediate demonstration of successful cultural integration. as Cherokee and white families shared traditional foods while engaging in conversations that revealed genuine interest in understanding each other's customs and perspectives. The social mixing challenged segregation patterns throughout Cherokee County. Cherokee musicians performed traditional wedding songs alongside white fiddlers whose frontier ballads created musical fusion that delighted audiences from both communities. The cultural exchange during the celebration provided models for ongoing cooperation that could extend beyond the Hayes Ranch to influence broader community relationships. Chief Standing Bear's formal presentation of wedding gifts included traditional Cherokee items alongside practical ranching equipment, symbolizing his blessing for the couple's integration of cultural knowledge systems. His speech, delivered in both Cherokee and English, established family obligations that honored tribal customs while acknowledging the unique circumstances of interracial marriage. My daughter carries Cherokee healing wisdom into a new world where traditional knowledge must adapt to serve changing needs, the chief declared with ceremonial formality. Samuel Hayes has proven himself worthy of Cherokee trust by respecting our ways while offering protection and partnership that serve our people's interests. The tribal leader's public endorsement provided crucial legitimacy for their marriage within Cherokee communities that might otherwise have viewed interracial unions with suspicion or disapproval. His support created precedents that could encourage other Cherokee families to consider similar cross-cultural partnerships. The white community's response to the wedding ceremony was overwhelmingly positive. Though some individuals continued to harbor private reservations about racial integration that they were reluctant to express publicly, given the obvious benefits that Cherokee healing knowledge had brought to the county's agricultural economy. Sheriff Crawford and the town council members who had previously harassed Mary Little Dove's healing work presented official wedding gifts that symbolized their acceptance of the cultural cooperation developing within their jurisdiction. Their participation in the ceremony represented political acknowledgement that Cherokee integration served community interests. Cherokee County is honored to be home to this historic union, Sheriff Crawford declared during the public celebration, his earlier hostility replaced by diplomatic enthusiasm for arrangements that had proven beneficial for everyone involved. We look forward to continued cooperation between Cherokee wisdom and white enterprise. The political opportunism evident in his remarks was overshadowed by the genuine social progress represented by official acceptance of interracial marriage and Cherokee traditional practices. The public endorsement from county leadership provided crucial support for expanding cultural integration efforts. As the wedding celebration continued into the evening, with Cherokee songs and white frontier dances creating unprecedented cultural fusion, Samuel and Mary Little Dove Hayes stood together on the porch where they had first begun to understand each other's dreams and aspirations. Their marriage represented triumph over every obstacle that prejudice and tradition had placed in their path. The transformation from desperate commercial transaction to celebrated cultural partnership demonstrated the power of love and mutual respect to overcome historical divisions between peoples who shared common hopes for health, prosperity, and happiness. Their wedding day marked not an ending, but a beginning of possibilities that would influence Cherokee County for generations to come. The $5 Samuel had paid for a sick Cherokee girl had purchased a future of hope and healing that extended far beyond his personal salvation from loneliness and financial ruin. Their partnership had proven that cultural cooperation could create miracles when guided by genuine respect for traditional knowledge and commitment to serving others, regardless of racial or cultural boundaries. 5 years after their historic wedding, the Hayes Ranch had become the epicenter of a revolutionary movement that was reshaping medical practice, agricultural methods, and social relations throughout the American Southwest. What had begun as Samuel's desperate $5 purchase of a sick Cherokee girl had evolved into an institution whose influence extended from university medical schools to federal Indian policy. proving that individual acts of courage and cross-cultural respect could create transformations that benefited entire generations. The Cherokee White Medical Institute, now housed in a magnificent stone building constructed with donations from philanthropists across the United States, had become the premier destination for medical professionals seeking training in integrated healing approaches that combine traditional indigenous knowledge with modern scientific methodology. Students traveled from Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins University, and prestigious European institutions to study under Mary Little Dove Hayes, whose systematic documentation of Cherokee healing principles have revolutionized understanding of holistic medicine. Dr. Mary Little Dove Hayes, she had earned an honorary doctorate from the University of Texas for her groundbreaking research stood before a lecture hall filled with medical students from 12 different countries, her presence commanding the same respect that had once been reserved exclusively for white male physicians. Her transformation from Marcus Webb's desperate cargo to internationally recognized medical authority represented possibilities that previous generations of Cherokee women could never have imagined. Cherokee healing teaches us that true medicine addresses the spiritual and environmental causes of illness, not merely the physical symptoms that conventional Western practice has learned to suppress, she explained to her rapt audience, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose methods had been validated through thousands of successful treatments. Today we will examine case studies demonstrating how traditional plant medicines can enhance surgical recovery when properly integrated with hospital protocols. Her lectures were being published in medical journals throughout Europe and America, introducing scientific audiences to indigenous knowledge systems that offered solutions to medical challenges that conventional approaches had been unable to resolve. The research she had conducted with Dr. Crawford and visiting professors from major universities had produced treatment protocols now being adopted by hospitals from Boston to San Francisco. Samuel's role in the institute had evolved from ranch manager to executive director of agricultural medicine programs that demonstrated how Cherokee farming and livestock management techniques could prevent diseases that required expensive medical interventions. His systematic documentation of traditional Cherokee animal husbandry had created educational curricula being taught at agricultural colleges throughout the United States. The Cherokee understanding of land as a living system, rather than simply a resource to be exploited, has revolutionized our approach to sustainable agriculture. Samuel addressed a conference of agricultural extension agents from 15 states. When we work with natural cycles rather than fighting against them, we create environments where both plants and animals thrive without the constant medical interventions that characterize industrial farming. His presentations at agricultural conferences had introduced thousands of farmers to Cherokee methods that increased crop yields, while reducing dependence on chemical treatments and expensive veterinary services. The economic benefits of traditional knowledge had convinced even skeptical ranchers that indigenous wisdom offered practical advantages that served business interests as well as cultural understanding. The social transformation of Cherokee County had been equally remarkable, as intermarriage between Cherokee and white families had become common rather than exceptional, creating a new generation of children who navigated both cultures with ease and served as natural bridges between communities that had historically viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. Their own children had become symbols of successful cultural integration. Margaret Standing Bear Hayes, now 5 years old, spoke Cherokee and English with equal fluency, while demonstrating her mother's healing gifts and her father's business acumen. Her younger brother, Joseph Samuel Hayes, had inherited his grandfather's diplomatic skills and was already showing interest in the legal profession that could help protect Cherokee rights within the American judicial system. The Hayes children attended the integrated school that had been established in Cherokee County, where Cherokee traditional knowledge was taught alongside conventional academic subjects. The educational innovation had attracted attention from progressive educators throughout the United States, who viewed the curriculum as a model for respectful cultural integration that strengthened rather than diminished indigenous identity. Chief Standing Bear, now in his 70th year, had become a regular visitor to the Hayes Ranch, where he consulted with his daughter and son-in-law about tribal policies that could benefit from their experience with successful cultural cooperation. His pride in Mary Little Dove's achievements was evident in every conversation, though he never failed to credit Samuel's character and commitment to Cherokee values. "My daughter chose well when she accepted Samuel Hayes as her husband," the chief reflected during one of his visits, watching his grandchildren play games that combined Cherokee and white traditions in seamless cultural fusion. "He has proven that white men can indeed honor Cherokee wisdom while sharing their own knowledge in ways that serve both peoples." The federal government had taken official notice of Cherokee County's peaceful integration model, sending investigators and policy analysts who documented the social and economic benefits of voluntary cultural cooperation. Their reports had influenced federal Indian policy by demonstrating that assimilationist approaches based on mutual respect achieved better results than forced cultural suppression or military domination. Marcus Webb had served 2 years in federal prison for human trafficking, though his sentence had been reduced in recognition of his ultimately beneficial role in bringing Mary Little Dove to Cherokee County, where her knowledge could serve broader community needs. Upon his release, he had been employed by the Cherokee White Medical Institute as a liaison coordinator, using his knowledge of both communities to facilitate beneficial exchanges between Cherokee and white families. "I never imagined that my desperate attempt to help a Cherokee family in crisis would lead to such remarkable transformations," Webb reflected during an institute gathering celebrating 5 years of successful operations. "Sometimes our mistakes become the foundation for miracles we could never have planned." His rehabilitation demonstrated the Institute's commitment to forgiveness and second chances, while his knowledge of trade networks between Cherokee and white communities proved valuable for expanding the reach of integrated healing programs. Throughout the Southwest Territory, Dr. Crawford had become Mary Little Dove's most enthusiastic collaborator, co-authoring research papers that documented the scientific basis for traditional Cherokee healing methods. His professional transformation from skeptical opponent to dedicated partner illustrated the power of evidence-based medicine to overcome cultural prejudices when traditional knowledge demonstrated superior results. "Working with Cherokee healing principles has made me a better veterinarian and a better scientist," Dr. Crawford admitted during a medical conference where he presented their joint research. Traditional knowledge systems contain sophisticated understanding of complex biological relationships that conventional medicine is only beginning to recognize. The professional partnership between Cherokee traditional healing and university-trained medicine had created treatment protocols that were being studied and adopted by medical institutions throughout North America and Europe, establishing Cherokee County as an international center for integrated medical research and education. The economic impact of the Hayes success story had been transformational for Cherokee County, which had become prosperous through medical tourism, agricultural innovation, and educational programs that attracted visitors and students from around the world. Property values had increased significantly, and local businesses thrived. By serving the constant stream of professionals who came to study integrated healing approaches, the Cherokee County Bank had not only forgiven Samuel's original debts but had provided substantial loans for expanding institute facilities and programs. Thomas Mitchell, the banker who had once threatened foreclosure, now served on the Institute's board of directors and frequently cited the Hayes Partnership as an example of profitable investments in cross-cultural cooperation. The Hayes Ranch investment has generated more economic development for Cherokee County than any other project in our history, Mitchell announced during the Institute's 5th anniversary celebration. Their success demonstrates that supporting cultural integration serves business interests as well as social justice. The financial benefits had convinced even formerly skeptical community members that Cherokee knowledge represented valuable assets rather than primitive obstacles to progress, creating widespread support for expanded cultural cooperation programs that attracted federal and private funding for additional research and education initiatives. The Institute's medical research programs had produced breakthrough treatments for diseases that conventional medicine had considered incurable, including innovative approaches to cancer treatment that combined Cherokee plant medicines with surgical interventions. The success of these integrated protocols had attracted international attention from oncologists seeking alternatives to chemotherapy and radiation treatments. Mary Little Dove's research team had identified specific compounds in traditional Cherokee medicines that enhanced immune system function while reducing the toxic side effects associated with conventional cancer treatments. Their work was being studied by pharmaceutical companies interested in developing new drugs based on traditional plant knowledge. The agricultural programs had demonstrated that Cherokee farming methods could restore soil fertility while increasing crop yields, providing solutions to environmental problems created by intensive industrial agriculture. The sustainable farming techniques developed at the Hayes Ranch were being adopted by farmers throughout the United States who sought alternatives to chemical-dependent agriculture. Samuel's documentation of Cherokee livestock management had shown how traditional methods could prevent diseases that cost American ranchers millions of dollars annually in veterinary expenses and livestock losses. The economic benefits had convinced the United States Department of Agriculture to fund expanded research into indigenous animal husbandry techniques. As Samuel and Mary Little Dove stood together on the porch of their ranch house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family and their roles as leaders of an international medical and agricultural research institute, they reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them from desperate circumstances to global recognition and influence. The sunset that painted the Texas sky in brilliant colors illuminated pastures filled with healthy cattle, gardens where Cherokee and white children learned traditional farming methods together, and buildings where medical students from around the world studied healing approaches that honored both scientific methodology and indigenous wisdom. Their legacy would continue for generations through the children they had raised, the students they had taught, the patients they had healed, and the countless families who had been inspired by their example to seek their own partnerships that transcended racial and cultural boundaries in service of human dignity and shared prosperity. The lonely widower's desperate gamble had become history's most successful investment in cross-cultural cooperation, proving that even the most unlikely circumstances could produce miracles when guided by love that recognized no boundaries and served no master except the healing of a divided world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.